In this Elden Ring video, I'm going to be showing you my Bloody Ballerina build. This is a New Game Plus build that focuses on staggering enemies through repeated strikes, as well as building up bleed and proccing hemorrhage. And it's a build that you can use from early to mid-game of your first playthrough, all the way through and until your New Game Plus playthrough as well. Performs very well in New Game Plus. All the footage in this video is from New Game Plus. The weapon we're using for this build is the Bloody Helice. This is a heavy thrusting sword. You'll see this in our heavy thrusting swords video later this week. But what's really great about this weapon is that it has very good bleed buildup, and its damage is all right, and really more importantly, its weapon skill, Dynast's Finesse, is absolutely outstanding. What this weapon skill does is it sort of pushes you backwards in a spin that has crazy amount of iframes, and then allows you to follow up with an R2 and then another R2 attack, hitting a total of 3 times if you do both. That deals an incredible amount of poise damage and also deals a lot of bleed buildup. So you usually trigger hemorrhage on at least like one attack with this full rotation, or maybe in one more attack in addition to this. And you also dodge attacks at the same time, and you almost completely fill an enemy's stagger bar at the same time. So another couple attacks and they're staggered while you're triggering bleed, and then you're doing a critical attack. And it's just really, really deadly. Frankly, the amount of iframes that this weapon skill gives is absolutely absurd. And it's one of the things that makes this weapon so fantastic. I have not messed around with this much in PvP, but I imagine this would be a phenomenal PvP weapon, simply because you can dodge through attacks and then put you in a position to counterattack really, really quickly, especially if you play unlocked. Diving into the ins and outs of Dynast's Finesse for a second is the fact that you can use this unlocked. So when you're locked on, you automatically spin backward away from your target because you spin away from the direction that you're facing. And when you play unlocked, you can face any direction instantly and then press the button and you'll sort of shoot backwards in that direction. This allows you to shoot towards a target or shoot to the side and dodge an attack. And because the follow-up attacks that you can do can also be aimed whatever direction you want, this means that you have a lot of flexibility in terms of like where you can position your character, and it'll take you a while to get this down 100%. I'm not even sure I have it down 100%, but it's really, really amazing when you can position yourself closer to a target when they attack, or maybe through them and putting yourself behind them where you're attacking and they don't even know where you are, allowing you to get those follow-up attacks. And playing unlocked and locked when you're playing PvE really depends on the enemy that you're facing. If you're fighting an aggressive enemy, playing locked on is definitely the way to go. But some enemies are very difficult. They jump backwards regularly. And in these situations, you want to play unlocked if you can. This will allow you to get into position and maneuver more easily, put yourself exactly where you need to go, because pushing yourself backward out of range of a target isn't useful unless you can hit them. But on aggressive targets, they tend to keep moving towards you, so when you dodge backward, they're still in range. But if they're not really aggressive, that's not the case. So learning when to play locked and unlocked is a huge part of this build, and that's something that's just going to take you time to figure out. A couple other items you could use for this build in the weapon shield category that I don't have here, just because I really like the way my build looks. This is 100% fashion, but if you were min-maxing, you could use something like the turtle shield in order to give yourself more stamina recovery. Just put that in your offhand and two-hand, and you can have that extra stamina recovery even if you're not using the shield. Or you could put the sacrificial axe there to give you more FP back when you get kills, to help with your FP management. Again, even if you're not using it and you're two-handing the Bloody Helice, you'll still get that benefit. So you could put those there if you want. I didn't want either of these on my character because of fashion. If you're talking about min-maxing, you would probably have one of those two things. Moving along to the armor that I'm using here, I kind of have a Mod Podge of 4 different sets that kind of give me the fashion that I want. I don't really like the gloves for this, but it puts me over the 51 poise breakpoint. I have the Mirai mask, which gives you a little bit arcane, which is actually nice for this build. You could use other helmets that give you more arcane than this. I would stay away from the silver tier mask because that will reduce your damage, even though it'll give you a good amount of arcane. But you could theoretically, have something that gives you more arcane than this. I just like the style of this. We have the Carrion Knight chest. We have the Bull Goat's armor gloves there and the scale legs. So this is kind of what makes this up. I wish my gloves were a bit different because I don't really like the look, but that gives me enough poise that I can tank through one normal attack. If you're talking about min-maxing here, you have an insane amount of equip load. You could use a way heavier armor set, and frankly, because you're using Dynast's Finesse to use as your dodge effectively with this build, you could go all the way up to the heavy threshold. You could literally, you don't need to medium roll with this build. It's not necessary, but I do find I medium roll from time to time, which is why I have that, and this is more about fashion for me. But if you really wanted to min-max this build, you would wear the heaviest armor set you could, and either still medium roll if you prefer medium rolling, or the heaviest armor set you could, and even heavy roll and just get maximum protection. Talking about the talismans we're using for this build, we have Shard of Alexander to improve the damage that we do with Dynast Finesse, no brainer there. We've got Lord of Blood's Exaltation. We trigger bleeding all the time with this weapon because it has about 100 bleed buildup at the stats that we have, pretty close to that. That's like 1 or 2 attacks on enemies, and that's a bleed in most cases, so that's really good. We have the Green Turtle Talisman. This increases your stamina recovery, and we have the Viridian Amber Medallion +2 as well, and that gives you more stamina. One of the things I want to mention about this build, and you're going to see it in our stats spread when we talk about that in just a second, is that it absolutely consumes asinine amounts of stamina, because when you're using L2 to dodge, it consumes stamina, and then the follow-up R2 with a follow-up R2 back into another L2 to dodge again, and then following up with an R2. You just go through lots and lots of stamina, and when I was putting this build together, that was the biggest restriction on making this build really shine, was that a lot of times I could get an L2, and then an R2, and an R2, and then I didn't have the stamina to press L2 again. So I've really pumped up the amount of stamina we have for this build, because it makes you able to play exactly how you want, as well as stamina recovery, which is why I recommended the Green Turtle Shield. That way you get your stamina back quickly, and you're able to do this again over and over quickly. So the general strategy with this build is I typically do like running R1 and R2 attacks on regular mobs, and when you're facing difficult enemies, you're going to be using Dynast Finesse, waiting for them to attack you and then responding. Remember that you can follow up with an R2 and then a second R2, but you don't always want to follow up with that second R2. A lot of times this will stagger an enemy, so it's good to go for if you think you can pull it off, even if you trade. But if you know that you're going to lose that trade, like if you're fighting somebody like Crucible Knight or something like that, just get that follow-up R2 and then get the hell out of there with another L2 immediately afterward, or roll backward. Also, when fighting some enemies, like playing on horseback is really, really strong with this weapon. If you hold down R2, you not only deal damage when you run into the enemy, but then when the R2 lets go, it does a crazy amount of damage. Very good for fighting dragons and things like that, because not only do you stagger them very easily with this weapon, you deal lots of damage to them when you're attacking, and you also have bleed buildup, which triggers regularly on them. So very, very good on horseback, and very, very good against dragons as well when you're fighting from horseback. Talking a little bit about how you would play this build if in the beginning of the game, like let's say you wanted to start a fresh playthrough and play this build, you could beeline it for the Bloody Helice. It's located in the Altus Plateau, which is a ways into the game, but you can get there quickly if you know how to get to Altus Plateau. So it's possible to get there killing very, very few enemies, and then you can get that. As far as armor sets go, it's not important which one you use, pick whatever one you want. And you can use the Warrior Jar Shard instead of Shard of Alexander early on. You can get Green Turtle Talisman early on. You can get a version of the Viridian Amber Medallion early on. And then really anything else you want to add to this build. I mean, that's 3 talismans. You're not even probably going to have 3 talisman slots at that point. But that will allow you to get going with this build from the very beginning of the game and play all the way through. So it's definitely possible to do if you want. There isn't really any weapon you can replace the Bloody Helice with because of its unique weapon skill, and use it until you get there. Talking about stats for this build, I have 50 Vigor, 21 Mind, 45 Endurance, 16 Strength, 30 Dexterity, 16 Intelligence, 7 Faith, and 56 Arcane. You don't need Intelligence or Faith for this build at all. I started as an Astrologer, so disregard those. They have no impact in this build whatsoever. When it comes to Vigor, we have 50 here. We'll probably take this up to 60 throughout New Game Plus. You don't really need a ton of Vigor for this build. You are playing a build that's not planning on getting hit. You're using Dynast Finesse to dodge, so you're not planning on taking damage all that often, so you don't need as much Vigor. And if you're using a heavy armor set, if you're really min-maxing this build, you're going to have really good protection anyway. 21 Mind is there because you're going to use Dynast Finesse in the follow-up attacks a lot, and if you don't have some Mind, you're going to be chugging blue pots constantly, and the last thing you want to do is have to chug a blue pot like 2 or 3 times during a boss fight. Like 1 time is max in my opinion. And if you can take Mind up higher throughout New Game Plus and into New Game Plus Plus, that would be ideal so that you don't have to worry about pots, or at least blue pots, while you're fighting a boss. 45 Endurance is there for the stamina. Because the Viridian Amber Medallion gives you stamina based on your max stamina, this is why we have this here, to get the most stamina we can possibly get. Again, because you use L2, R2, R2, and then L2, R2, R2, consumes so much stamina, and if you don't have a lot of stamina, you're just simply not going to be able to do that, and then you really can't play the build in the way that you want. I wouldn't go any higher than 50 Endurance, because after that point, the stamina you get completely drops off hard. So don't go any higher than 50 Endurance. You can go up to 50. And you have so much equip weight for this, you could wear a way heavier armor set if you want. 16 Strength is there to meet the requirements for the weapon. The weapon scales okay with Strength, not very good. This would probably be the last stat you would push when you're talking about increasing the damage of this weapon. And Dexterity to 30 actually gives pretty good scaling. Dexterity is not a bad stat that this weapon scales with. Arcane is probably better up until like 50, and then Dexterity starts to catch up a little bit. But from this point forward, you're going to want to increase Dexterity and Arcane to further increase your damage. Keep in mind that Arcane is also going to give you bleed buildup, which is good. It's not going to give you a lot more at this point. But you're going to continue to increase Dexterity and Arcane to get more damage on this weapon. You're going to get a decent amount through New Game Plus and then New Game Plus Plus, making it a really good New Game Plus weapon. And just some final tips before I wrap up this video. You can use the Dragon Communion Seal with this build. The problem is that you won't have points for Faith unless you have even more stat spread than what we have here. So if you take points for Faith to meet the requirements for spells, you're going to take away from your damage with this build. So you can have it and maybe use some like limited spells, like, you know, Swarm of Flies or something like that to help with bleed buildup. But you're probably not going to use too many spells, maybe some dragon spells if you want. But that's why I didn't include it here. And I also just like playing as a melee build with Dynast Finesse, and I felt like if I had a lot of spells, then I wouldn't really be playing that way. Additionally, if you're using the Flask of Wonders Physique, I like to use the two crystal tiers that improve, one that improves stamina and the other that improves stamina recovery. Again, very stamina hungry build, and you just need as much stamina and stamina recovery as you can get with this build in order to be able to play the way you want to play. So that's why we have those there. And when it comes to Great Runes, I highly recommend Radahn's Great Rune because this is going to give you HP, FP, and stamina. And these are all really good for this build, particularly the stamina. Having more health is good, and then also giving you more FP so you don't have to worry about pots is good. This would be the ideal Great Rune for this build. So that wraps up our Bloody Ballerina build. I'm going to be covering some more Hogwarts Legacy this week and going into the weekend, but you can expect our Heavy Thrusting Sword video on Friday, so you can look forward to that. And if you guys have suggestions for other builds, I know another one that will be coming out next week is a Bloodhound's Fang build. I know people have been asking for that. But if there are other ones you guys want to see, let me know. And which weapon you want me to do next, leave that in the comments because I do take that into consideration.